You know, for the longest time, a company's tax bill was just another number on a spreadsheet, something to be managed, minimized, and moved on from. Well, that's all changing, and it's changing fast. Today, how a company handles its taxes is becoming a fundamental test of its character, its values, and its real place in society. Okay, let's really dive into this. Because this one question, it's right at the heart of a massive shift in how everyone, from investors to consumers to board members, is starting to look at companies. It perfectly frames the conflict between two totally different ways of thinking about business. So on one side, you've got that traditional viewpoint, tax is a cost, plain and simple, and a company's main duty is to its shareholders, which means cutting that cost as low as legally possible. But then there's this new view, which sees it in a completely different light. It argues that paying a fair share of tax is part of a company's social contract, a direct contribution to the places where it actually operates and makes money. And look, this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate. As the World Bank points out here, we're talking about the money that funds literally everything we rely on. Taxes are the financial bedrock for public health care, for education, for infrastructure. So a company's decisions about its taxes, they have very, very real-world consequences for all of us. To really get why this new perspective is gaining so much steam, we first have to understand the old playbook. For years, the name of the game for a lot of big multinational corporations was aggressive tax minimization. And that strategy led to what's often called a global race to the bottom. Now, a key tool in this playbook is something called base erosion and profit shifting, or BEPS for short. The name sounds super complicated, right? But the idea is actually pretty simple. Imagine a company makes billions in sales in countries with normal tax rates, but through some fancy accounting, it claims most of its profits were actually earned in a tiny office in a low-tax country. That's BEPS in a nutshell, shifting profits to wherever taxes are lowest, even if the real work happens somewhere else entirely. And the cost of this playbook is absolutely staggering. It eats away at the tax base of countries all over the world. What does that mean? It means less government funding for the essential services that create a stable, healthy society. And this hits developing countries especially hard, because they lose out on vital revenue they desperately need for development. This also uncovers another cost of that race to the bottom. While some companies are focused on avoiding taxes, other countries are fiercely competing for real, on-the-ground investment. Just take a look at this chart. It shows the value of tax subsidies for research and development. Right now, the incentives in the US are only about 20% of the OECD average, and they're less than 10% of what China is offering. In fact, a policy change in the US back in 2022 actually made its position weaker. Before, companies could deduct 100% of their R&D costs right away, which was a huge, immediate incentive to innovate. Now, they have to spread that same deduction over 5 years. Let's be honest, that basically cuts the real value of that tax break in half and makes that critical investment a lot less attractive. But that old playbook of aggressive tax avoidance, it's starting to run into a wall. A really powerful new force is changing the game, ESG, a framework that is fundamentally rewriting the rules of what we consider corporate value. And that force, that game changer, is ESG. Think of it as a new lens that investors, consumers, and regulators are using to look past the quarterly profit report. They're trying to measure a company's true long-term value, its risks, and its actual impact on the world. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And while the E for environment tends to get a lot of the headlines, it's the G for governance where tax strategy has really found its new home. More and more, how a company manages its tax affairs is being seen as a critical sign of good governance, transparency, and ethical leadership. And what's really fascinating here is that this isn't some fringe activist movement. We're talking about some of the most powerful institutional investors in the world, the ones managing trillions of dollars. They are now officially building ESG factors, including tax responsibility, right, into their investment decisions. They're demanding a whole new level of accountability. So, okay, if the old way is out, what does a good tax strategy actually look like in this new ESG-driven world? Well, thankfully, a pretty clear framework for responsible tax is starting to take shape. The Thomson Reuters Institute lays out 5 key pillars here. It all starts with governance, meaning the board itself is directly overseeing the tax strategy. It's about reframing tax planning so that tax is just a consequence of doing real business, not the other way around. It's about compliance, transparency, and even using tax incentives to help meet environmental goals. So what does that look like in practice, day to day?
It means companies are now creating public statements about their tax principles. They're making sure a committee at the board level, maybe the audit or ESG committee, has direct oversight. And this one is crucial. They're working to align their profits with their economic substance, meaning taxes get paid where the real people, assets, and business activities are, and then being totally transparent about it.
But here's the kicker. This whole shift isn't just about ethics or polishing a company's reputation. It's actually about smart, resilient business strategy. The big insight here is that in today's world, being a responsible taxpayer is becoming a major competitive advantage. For one thing, the rules of the game are changing. The world's regulators are closing in on that old playbook. The OECD is putting in place a 15% global minimum corporate tax. This makes the old strategy of just shifting profits to a zero tax haven way less attractive, and in a lot of cases, completely pointless. And at the exact same time, the competition is no longer about who has the lowest tax rate. It's about who has the best incentives for real, tangible investment. So while the US has been weakening its R&D deductions, China is out there offering a massive 200% super deduction for R&D spending. The smart money isn't flowing to tax havens anymore. It's flowing to innovation hubs. So when you put it all together, these changes mean a responsible tax strategy is no longer a cost center. It's a strategic asset. It dramatically reduces the risk of legal battles and brand damage. It attracts those huge growing pools of ESG-focused capital. It strengthens a company's reputation, and it future-proofs the business for a world where tax rules are only getting tighter. So this brings us right back to where we started. As corporate tax moves out of the back office accounting department and into the spotlight as a key ESG issue, it's not a niche topic for experts anymore. It's become a vital sign of a company's health, its ethics, and its long-term strategy. And it's a question that all of us should probably start asking.